Greetings, everyone. This is your host, Alex, and with me I have two longtime fans of Blizzard Entertainment, Jackson and Ian. And I welcome everyone as we discuss an old Blizzard classic, Starcraft. This is not a discussion about Starcraft's PvP nor its esports popularity. Today we are specifically speaking on the lore and the story of this broad and fascinating sci fi epic. A 90s gaming cultural phenomenon. From the echoes of the early golden years of a once beloved Blizzard Entertainment comes a sci fi masterpiece which has heavily influenced the gaming industry as a whole and even modern science fiction pop culture. We're talking about StarCraft. Our discussion goes straight to the beginning, and we're tackling the original Terran campaign, the story which sets the stage for the ambitious saga. Thank you two for joining today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, how was playing the Terran campaign again? For me, this was the first time I've played it in probably like 25 years, or no, 20 years, if anything. It feels like forever.
I'm actually a pretty big nerd for my old Blizzard games, so every once in a while I'll pull them out and replay them, and StarCraft is one that I will replay from time to time, so it hasn't been as long, but doing it with the idea of going back through the campaign again to pay attention to the actual lore and the campaign, things about it kind of jumped out at me. Like, it felt faster than when I was younger and the first time I remember playing it, and some of the like level layouts and things were different than I remember, but the lore also kind of jumps out at you again if you're looking for it.
I would agree to the idea that it felt faster, absolutely. But the one thing that surprised me is a lot of games when I go back to, when I play again, when I'm especially being older now, is I sometimes think, man, this wasn't quite as cool as I remembered, right? But I can honestly say that didn't happen with this one. I will say the quality of life gimmicks, as far as what StarCraft 2 gave us to what we can do with our keyboard and operate, that was jarring. But as far as the music, the atmosphere, and the story, it was still really badass. Like, I loved it.
And I gotta believe, guess I gotta agree with Ian. Sometimes I kind of go back and play some older stuff, so it hasn't been 20 years for me. Probably about, maybe only like 2 years. But it's been a while, and yeah, I haven't played it with the in mind to look over at all the lore and stuff. There are things that shot out to me, kind of, that I never really noticed before. Mostly the amount of characters that they cast in the Terran campaign are actually very small. There's really only like 4 characters that are kind of relevant in it, and you never really see the political leaders of the Confederates. So I thought that was strange, seeing it have a bit time running through that I kind of never noticed that before. And it's a lot shorter than I remember too.
It's a good point. You don't see any Confederate soldiers or actually any of their leaders. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, I mean, the only Confederate leader is General Duke, and then he flips pretty early on. So, like, you don't get any other feelings because you start in Marsara, which is like a backwater station, one of the level names, right? And you're kind of like in the middle of nowhere of the area, and then you kind of work out of that. I also agree, like, some of the things that I noticed more this time is when you're playing through the first, the Terran campaign, it's almost all you fighting other Terran. And you don't fight very many Protoss, very little at all. You fight some Zerg, and it's kind of like introduced as this almost alien horror element, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later. But it's mostly you joining sides with the rebels and then fighting the Confederates and trying to kind of get out of their scope of influence. So I didn't really remember that being that way, but it does work with, I think, the vibe of the story as it kind of builds throughout.
So since we're on that topic of Confederates, Jack and I talked about this the other day, and it was almost amusing because it was like a whiplash, because as a kid I didn't even notice it. But holy crap, they literally use the Confederate flag as their symbol. It's really funny.
Yeah. seeing that, it's pretty hilarious. Seeing that on like the satellite and the cinematic, I'm like, holy crap, that was straight up the Confederate.
It's shown like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, it is. That was jarring to me. It was weird because again, you're as a kid, you don't think about it because growing up in the '90s, it wasn't really a big deal for most of us, right? But it's funny because this is set in a future in like 2200s. It's like, oh, this is still a thing apparently in this universe.
You can tell that it was almost just thrown in there as kind of just for fun, because like if there was going to be some real breakdown of what they thought it would be, they probably would keep the Confederate flag there but change it a little bit. But obviously it wasn't a big deal because eventually, as we know, Korhal and Minx come in and they basically change the Terran symbol after that.
So actually an interesting tidbit is when they were making the cinematics, apparently they made the lore around the cinematics. Like they made the cinematics first, and then they did the lore around it. So it was probably just the cinematic guys playing around, like, oh, the Confederates, let's put a Confederate flag.
Oh,
I think that makes perfect sense because the first cinematic you see is those like down south country guys driving in the Vulture. They hit the Zergling and they have these like southern accents. And then then there's like this harken to the Confederacy, and I think it just builds out from there. And you're like, is this supposed to be connected or not?
That's a great point. One of the funniest things I remember as a kid was when we discussed these cinematics. We always had to try to find some explanation for, like, the very intro cinematic where that big ship flies over them and blows them up. Everybody's like, oh, what unit is that in the game? We're like, it's not in the game. Like, but why isn't it? And vice versa with the tank unit used to kill a Protoss unit in a cinematic later. And you're like, where's that in the game? It's like, guys, these are cinematics that were made before the game, and sometimes these things just happen.
Yeah, I think that they were like trying to represent some things, because I always was like, man, that tank, is that what the siege tank is supposed to be like? Because that's not how I picture it, because it like shoots a missile at the Dragoon, right? Is what you're talking about?
Right.
And then some of the pieces obviously seem different than what you actually are getting in the game.
And you can almost say, I was literally like so invested in the lore and looking at every detail this time around that when I read the manual for the Terran campaign, one thing that stuck out to me was how it mentions they basically banned religion later on when the world became like one government. But when I'm watching the intro cinematic, I never even would have noticed it without the subtitles turned on, so this was new. But in the part where the Protoss ship is blowing up the ship, all the Terran are screaming, right? Oh, abandoned ship! And I think one of them screaming in Spanish, and because the subtitles say Jesus Christ. So I was like, wait a minute, there's religion right there. Funny thought to think about. But then again, I was like, something like that could have easily just been more of just a shout of terror.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Jack. I didn't know that they had, made the kind of the game with the idea of how they wanted the gameplay, and then made the cinematics for it, and then built the lore off of that. When you think about that, it does make sense for some of the things that you see and the way that you see them throughout the first game.
I'm glad you brought that up.
There were some cinematics, I guess, that were made at the lore team's request, but none of them early in the game.
Yeah, because later on, it's obvious, like in StarCraft 2, they had more of a foundation of what things were going to look like. But later on in those Terran cinematics, the Wraiths, they look exactly like the game. The battle cruisers look exactly like the game. So you could tell there was something going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, StarCraft went through a lot of, I guess, thought experiments in the beginning. Like, I don't even think Kerrigan was even a character at the beginning. It was like almost a joke.
Wow. So I'll tell you one thing that whiplashed me when I first started, because unlike you guys, it was like 20 years for me playing this campaign. My Blizzard account still remembered the original name I used when I was a kid. So when it came up and pulled the account names, it was Coffee. And I was like, holy crap, I haven't used that in decades. But it was right there. Still helped.
I think that a StarCraft Remastered is still I guess, using the old infrastructure for Starcraft.
I guess that's proof of it right there.
Since probably it's all there.
Is there anything, if I have a question, and I'll bring up an example. I played both old and the new, the remaster. This is the first time I actually officially dived into the remaster. And I think the remaster was phenomenal. They really captured the look and the feel. It basically looked exactly how I thought it looked. I remembered, right? Just crisp. But there were a few things that I was like, wait a minute, is that different? And I came to realize that it wasn't. It was just my memory. My memory had different impressions, but one of them was the SCV unit. When I saw the SCV unit, SVC or SCV, whatever, he's wearing on the top of his head, kind of like it looks like something like a aviator or airplane guy would wear with goggles. And I could have sworn to you that they wore just a baseball cap, like they looked more hillbilly than I thought. And so when I went back to the original graphics, I had to really look closely, and I realized that they based it off the original. That was like, oh my gosh, I completely didn't realize that. I imagined something that wasn't there.
I mean, I had the same experience with Jim Raynor. I always thought Jim Raynor was bald in StarCraft 1.
Yep.
And then I look at the remaster, he has hair. I'm like, wait, they changed that. I go back to the normal, and yep, it's just low resolution, but he has hair.
Yeah, it's like this kind of crew cut or like almost shaved head, but there's a little bit of hair there. I thought the same thing. I thought Jim Raynor was a bald guy.
You know what? I did too.
Yeah, it's easy to see it without a reference of the high resolution.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And speaking of Jim Raynor, let's talk about there's some obvious 90 influence with how they designed Jim Raynor. And what I mean is he had that very he was designed obviously to be the character that appealed to the teenage boy. And I'll admit, straight from the get-go, I always thought Jim Raynor was awesome. Jim Raynor's so cool and all that. And then when I playing it, watching him in this campaign, I'm looking at him at a different angle, and it almost cracked me up because whenever he's introduced, and even in mission briefings, he has this strange style of dialogue where he's like, "Hey, what's up, man? How you doing, man?" This like has this really cool guy vibe.
Yeah.
Like he's trying to be your friend, unlike everyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
It's true, which is a really weird thing considering what's going on. They just encountered a new alien race, and then a third alien race is blowing up planets, and they're just like, "Hey, man, it's all good." What are these backwater yokels all smoking right now? And why is he driving a vulture?
Oh yeah. And then let's just bring it up since we're talking about it. But that scene, everybody thought, especially when you play it today and you meet Kerrigan. Kerrigan, for some of you who haven't played this game, she's a psychic. She can read people's minds. And Raynor doesn't say a thing, but then Kerrigan goes, "Oh, you pig!" He's like, "What? I didn't say nothing." And I'm just like shaking my head, just like, Blizzard has that frat boy reputation, and this comes right in the game.
Which you didn't think about that when you were a kid because it wasn't known. Now you might play through it again and be like, "Oh, now we know who was designing the game."
Well, and we're being too hard on them because this is everyone's games in the 90s. This wasn't just Blizzard, and Kerrigan was the way a lot of these female characters in the game, especially Kerrigan, the way they had the actress present herself when you're simply telling her just to move over here, she has this sexy way of saying things like, "All right," but that was just the 90s, man. That was normal back then.
It was interesting when I was playing through it because I thought as a kid, I thought that Kerrigan was more flirty in the past when I was younger, and I think you're right. I think they kind of designed the game in that way. And I thought the same thing in the Valkyries and Brood War and the way they talk. But who knows? I didn't think it was that much this way. But maybe that's just because, I'm different now. Things feel different now. But there are some things from nostalgia that just carry over, like bald Jim Raynor and flirty Kerrigan. You can't get out of your head completely.
I think it's just we've been desensitized as flirting as with everything else being, worse in the last 20 years. But back in the 90s, that was pretty flirty, for game character.
Yeah, it's true. Also, I just want to say, I thought that Kerrigan had dreads in the old version of the game. To me, it looked like she had like red hair, dreadlocks or something. It was just that pixelated look. Did you guys think that
Dude,
too?
Yeah.
so yes, I can't even tell you what I thought Kerrigan had. All I know is this. I just didn't like it. I just remember as a kid thinking, I don't know what they did with Kerrigan's hair, but this is weird. And so I'm seeing all these characters in the remastered, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this looks good. And then I saw Kerrigan in the remastered. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. It's not even funny.
Yeah, I think it's just product of the time. It's hard to, do hair in the 90s.
Yeah.
It probably just looked like dreadlocks because of that.
Yeah.
Correct. That's a good
that's
point. That's a good point. I will tell you this, since we're talking about these characters, one thing that stood out to me, especially reading the manual that gave the context for these characters, is General Minks. When you read the manual, and I thought it was such a cool part of the story that a lot of people don't realize, is the planet he was from, where the Core Hall, I believe, where the rebels originally were stationed at. The Confederacy didn't even try to do some diplomacy. They came in with a full squadron and said 1,000 apocalyptic level nukes and just burnt the planet to a crisp. And what I thought was, wow, I actually can understand exactly why Minks is so radical. I can completely understand his character, because if anybody had to go through something like that, your idea of just completing anything till the task is done no matter what, that Minks makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I thought about that too. I wanted to add something I noticed about playing through the campaign overall. If you play the campaign and then you go back, if you can find the old, StarCraft manual, there's always lore in their old manuals is just great. It gives you another way to like immerse yourself in the world. I used to love reading the old Diablo manual because they had all these crazy quotes from old sources and stuff, and they just made it even more gothic and dark, right? But what's interesting is the lore in the Terran manual, almost none of it gets brought up. You don't know that you're really in the Caprulu sector. You don't know anything about the Core Hall, the planet of Core Hall, and the other planets in the system. You don't know about the Imogen Protectorate. None of that stuff really gets brought up unless you're paying a lot of attention. And I think even in the Terran campaign, barely at all. Obviously, Mengsk is from Core Hall, and his faction is the Sons of Core Hall, freedom fighters against the Dominion or the Confederacy. But at the same time, very much like a lot of that lore doesn't make it into the gameplay because you're just going through fighting aliens and trying to survive.
Good point.
Yeah, and it's a lot shorter than StarCraft 2, or StarCraft 2's putting in, a lot of lore dumps and stuff. Where I think StarCraft just had less space, and at the time it was probably less branched out as it is today.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say less developed in terms of how they played how they did stuff with their games, because it was one of their first projects, and it was pretty ambitious to be able to play a game like that. They had Warcraft as an RTS before, but StarCraft really expanded on what they could do from Warcraft 1 and 2.
That's something that I will forever miss about. And I guess, to be fair, I believe a lot of modern games still do it. It's just harder to come by. But the amount of care that was put into this background lore in some of these games, to provide an example, this is something you will never see today, is both Donkey Kong Countries 1 and 2 and 3, during the credits, it would show the names of every single unit I'm walking by. That's the kind of dedication I'm talking about that these old devs had, and you can absolutely see it within this game. There's a lot of passion and thought put into this story, and it's just as thrilling and interesting now as an adult as it was when I was a kid, in my opinion. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I think you and Jack bring up a good point too, because they probably just didn't have the actual space to do a lot of that stuff, right? The tooltips aren't the same and everything. So you when you're first playing games like this and you're not used to them, you're going to be like, what does the stim pack do? And you can pull up the manual and it actually tells you what it's supposed to do. And then what's great is in the manual, they give you funny anecdotes or stuff about like why the fire bats are kind of all crazy people that like fire, and this stim pack has these fake side effects, insomnia, weight loss, hallucinations, severe internal hemorrhaging, all that stuff. Like, that's great. They really do put a lot of care into it. But you wouldn't get that in the game because it's just this little button that makes your guys go faster, shoot faster, and take damage.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference between just simply playing a game and diving into a game. You're allowing other resources outside of the game to help influence that outlook you have of it, and it just really enhances the experience overall.
Yeah, they did a really good job at StarCraft 1 fleshing out the lore, because even back then, just reading the stories like Liberty's Crusade and stuff, it was great getting a broader outlook on the lore, because StarCraft universe is just so interesting what they created.
100%. Since we've talked a bit about the lore here, is there anybody that came across obnoxious scenarios in the game that I guess I should say is just related to old game design? I'll start. I had several moments in that game where I literally was shooting myself in the foot because I wasn't even thinking about... I just had this one moment where it's like, you need additional supply depots. Like, okay, fine, build a supply depot. I click my SCV, I'm like, build a supply depot. And I forget, and I start doing something in the game. And I'm trying to build it. It's like, you need supply depots. I'm like, what the heck? So I go select my SCV, tell them to build another one. And all of a sudden, like 5 minutes later, I'm in the same spot. I'm like, and then I realized my SCV was stuck. And I was just... he couldn't even build the whole time. I was like, oh, what the hell? And then the level where you have to have the SCV carry the psi emitter. I had the same scenario with that, where I was strategically sending some units over here, and I'm like, okay, you go over here. But the whole time he was stuck. And I found out at the end, and it was just like so freaking annoying. I'm like, why do my SCVs keep getting stuck?
I mean, I kind of had a similar thing. Nothing extreme like that, but I'd always fly SCV, like, build a supply depot here and look away. I'd go back and it would just be the SCV there, like, I can't build there. I'm like, why? There's all this space there. Why can't you build there? For some reason, he just stopped and said that. I don't know why.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of the time, a unit just pass through that. So, like, you talked about quality of life improvements in StarCraft 2 and the other games too, like Warcraft 3 and stuff that came after. Like, if you want to put a building down, units know that and they just move out of the way. But that doesn't happen. You have to like click and move your units out of the way because the Marines are like, oh, we don't care.
Exactly.
So they're just in the way. Or if you're going to put like a turret down near your crystals or the mineral deposits, but SCVs are running in that path, they won't get out of the way, so they just cancel it. And I did that a couple of times too, where I was like, what are my guys doing? Oh, why are there 3 SCVs just sitting around not doing anything? The only other one that was really annoying for me was the fact that you can't rally point on a mineral field. So when you build, your SCV in StarCraft 2, you can set them to auto collect minerals from creation, but you can't do that in StarCraft 1. So they just create this pile of SCVs standing around minerals or something, and they're not actually going in and collecting any of them. And you're like, what is going on? Why am I not getting into minerals?
Yeah, that was the best quality of life improvement Blizzard did in Warcraft 3. You're like, I can't go back. It's hard.
It's hard.
You're not wrong there.
Playing the old games now is a little bit hard just because of how much it take for granted being able to move and scroll with a unit selected to do something, or the auto pathing and auto functions.
Yeah, it's like a new type of difficulty that we never even knew existed back then.
Yeah.
And just adding to that, this was by far my most angering moment when I played this campaign. I believe it was the very last level. And so, yes, I will say this. The game was easier than I remembered. But the last level, and I still beat it, but the last level gave me a little bit of trouble, which is fun, right? It's like, okay, finally, we're getting a little bit of a challenge here. And I was so reliant on using robotic units that when I attacked the enemy base, they literally locked down like all my guys. I couldn't believe it. Like all my battle cruisers, all my Goliaths, all my tanks. I never seen so many ghosts lock down so many units before. And I was like, wow, am I going to have to make an army of freaking Marines to fight this? But then I said, no, I'm going to do the same thing back to them. So I built 8 ghosts, upgraded them, upgraded their lockdown, did everything. And all of a sudden I see the enemy coming with some units. And I was like, here we go. And I have a party of just ghosts. And I tell him to lock down the tank. And all 8 of the ghosts lock down the tank. And I just remember staring at the screen, and it was like a minute of just like dumbfoundedness, like I was even being attacked and I'm not doing anything. I was like, "Are you serious?" I was so upset.
Yes. I don't want to get ahead because I have stuff from the Zerg campaign where that happens too. That's super annoying. But I did the same thing. Where you've got your casters, right, the ghost or the science vessel or something, and you want them to do that, and they all just focus on the one thing because you'd have to individually select one ghost to do one target, and that's super annoying.
And like I said, it adds a whole new level of difficulty.
Yeah.
I do have to laugh though when a ghost locks down a battle cruiser. You know, like in lore, there is size of a small city. When the game is just one guy shoots a thing and just locks down the
I know.
It's funny. Yeah, in lore, those battle cruisers are carrying multiple siege tanks and wraiths and
they're huge.
They're huge. Yeah. And science vessels, I think, are even bigger, and that's gonna be locked down.
Yeah, that's what's funny, right? Because one of the levels, you go onto a science vessel, and you're Jim Raynor running around in there with his backup, and you're trying to, steal Confederate files, and you don't, the video beforehand, the cinematic shows the science vessel from the outside. And oh, that kind of does look like a science vessel. Then you're like, wait a minute, in the game, you could put like 3 Marines in the same profile of the science vessel, and then they just shoot it down from the sky, really easy and very annoyingly. What is this game? What is going on here?
Right.
There's a funny YouTube video out there. Somebody did it with Starcraft 2 where they actually made all the units to scale, and they showed Protoss, Zerg, and Terran, and it's crazy because I think when they put the battle cruisers and when they put the carriers on, you can't see them. You can't physically see them. You just see their shadows because they're too big.
Ooh, I gotta watch that. That sounds cool.
It's pretty cool.
That's actually that's really cool. Well, do we know how big the biggest Zerg unit is? Like, I think Overlords are pretty big.
Overlords are huge, but there's also not in StarCraft 1, but in StarCraft 2, there's the Leviathan unit, which I think is the biggest.
Yeah, the Leviathan.
That's right.
I think that was your base with Kerrigan and the Hearthstone.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, well, we'll get to that.
I just wanted to quickly jump back when you were talking about the last level. I appreciated, even though the campaign felt easier, and because I was doing it for the story less than I was my normal completionist, I'm going to look at everything on the map and kill every single unit and building of everybody before I hit continue, which can take you a lot longer to finish each level or the campaign. I was able to knock it out a lot quicker, but I did have a better appreciation for how the tactics of each level did evolve in a way that helped you kind of figure it out. Like, you're introducing units. That's pretty standard for these kinds of games, right? Every level, a new unit, a new way to fight. Okay, now we've graduated from the bio infantry to the mech stuff to the flying stuff. But I appreciated how at the last level they've combined all of your units in a way, and the enemy is set up in a defense with high ground, with better visibility on you, with their ghosts that lock down every single one of your battle cruisers, even if you make 20 of them. And they actually get really smart and make it a much more difficult level for you to beat at the end. I thought that was pretty good.
I agree. I would completely agree to that.
It does feel like you're fighting the might of pretty much, Arcturus, though. Arcturus that won, like General Duke. Now it's kind of the combined might of humanity is trying to make it so you can't leave.
Right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
But for you to be successful in that level, you need to have a concept called like a mobile defense. Because if you're trying to be on offense somewhere else, but then they come in with siege tanks that can kill all of your defensive buildings and stuff, and battle cruisers that can shoot your siege tanks, or ghosts that will lock them down or nuke them, you have to have the ability to find those ghosts and go kill them, and find those units and counter them. So you have to have defense available to move around from one side of the map to the other to protect yourself.
What's the name of the attachment to the command center that can see cloaked units?
The
Scanner.
That thing is one of the best things you can ever have as a Terran, in my opinion. Holy crap. Just for that reason.
The Terran enemy uses it against you.
Yeah, until they use it against you. But having that ability just to be like, I mean, I've used it just for a single ghost before, and it's still satisfying.
So the ComSat station does that scanner sweep is amazing. I actually hotkey it because I use it so much.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That is definitely one of the big things.
It's
for
really
hotkey.
good.
And your idea of a mobile defense, absolutely accurate. On the last level, I had a group of wraiths just for that, like so I can just get to any part of the map quick.
Yeah, that's smart.
Yep. And it paid off big time, especially when I was attacked by a group of fire bats. Couldn't do anything. But yeah, that was a good level, and I completely agree.
It does really challenge your ability to put everything together, because you have to have a defense and an offense to get to the ion cannon at the end of the level to destroy it. And if you kind of just try to like hold out and wait out, it's not really doable. You have to be able to do both.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was one part in the campaign that stuck out to me for several reasons. One, because it was funny, but two, I actually have a memory. There was Jackson, I think you both know him, an old friend we used to have to play Starcraft with named Benny, but he would always reference this one line. And it was I think it was the second to last level when Arcturus Minx is basically kind of starting to show his true colors. And Kerrigan's trying to argue against him, and he has his own plans. But Jim Raynor, the way he replies to him was just so funny. He just simply says, "Oh, what was it? She's right, man. Think this through." like in the stoner hippie kind of way, like
Jim Raynor
going right back to like
he's the dude.
Yep.
He is absolutely the dude, and I love him just as much as I ever did for it, because it's just like you said, the dude.
You can't dislike Jim Raynor.
Yeah, it's true.
No,
he's just great.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
But I mean, I was just gonna say, Jack brings up a good point that I didn't think about either, is the fact that there is like 5 characters, right? You've got Jim Raynor, Sarah Kerrigan, Arcturus Minsk, and then you got General Duke, who comes in and out. He's not super important, but you use him later. And then the adjutant robot, and that's like it. Those are all the humans that you interact with, I think, in the whole mission, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
And yes, you're absolutely right. But what's funny, though, is you have this illusion that there's way more, only because throughout the entire campaign, you're constantly dealing with so many hundreds of different voices. Like, go, go, go. Got something on your mind? You know, all these Terrans that are with you on the...
Yeah. That all have different, like, ways of talking, different... I almost said dialects, different accents and stuff. So clearly there's a different parts of the Dominion or the Confederacy out there.
I will say, and I loved this as a kid, and I love it just as much now as an adult, the final cinematic of the Terran campaign. First of all, it's a propaganda speech given by Minx.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid and I heard it, you have the context of Minx's character when you're a kid. You're like, this guy's evil. I don't like him. But I listened to it again, and I'm just like, man, Minx actually makes a pretty banging talk. Like kind of gonna sit here as a Terran and agree with what he's saying, as long as I don't know what he did. And realistically, I don't want to take Minx's side, but letting one person die as a general just doesn't sound that epic and grand as a scale. It's just that it did end up becoming arguably the biggest mistake he ever made. We find that out later.
Or was it the best mistake he ever made?
Oh, yeah. going back to that,
Foreshadowing.
I know, right? Going back to that cinematic, it's just so iconic. Is the freaking scene where you see the hand floating, holding the cigarette,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it's so good. That encapsulates and basically shows StarCraft and the Terran summed up so well. Okay, let me just put it this way: the Protoss are awesome, the Zerg are awesome. They're really cool designed races, but Terran in a game that features humans. I usually find humans boring in these adventurous sci-fi games or fantasy. Terran, Blizzard managed to make the humans interesting, and I just love their identity.
Yeah, I wanted to say this at some point. This is perfect. I was thinking about it because you're right. The Protoss have this super advanced technology. You don't even really know what any of it is. Even by the end of the game, you still don't really understand them. They're just badass. They're very good. Their tech's very strong, and it's futuristic, right? The Zerg are these crazy xenomorph creatures that can kind of just take over everything they want, multiply rapidly, and they literally swarm you, and that's what they do. And then as the Terran, you're just humans that are caught in the middle fighting both of them, which is like a sci-fi trope and always has been. But in StarCraft, they do it in a way that still stands out and makes you want to root for the Terrans and hope that the Terrans come out on top and do really well, which is, I think, pretty awesome. And then I was just going to double down on what you said is like, this is who the Terrans are, right? The lit cigarette in space on the floating hand. I also say, you were talking about this last night when you were talking about the cinematic where they go board the science vessel, and there's the guys bring in the nuke, and they're like, thank God for cold fusion. They've got ice and beer in with the armed nuke so they can drink beer on the ship. So classic. My favorite cinematic, I think, of the original game.
You're not wrong.
Nothing tops that.
When has anyone ever combined alcohol with a nuclear bomb? Like, it really just shows the Terrans' personality so well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it shows their perspective of what they're using this awesome technology, cold fusion, for. It's just the cooler beer.
Absolutely fantastic.
I love it.
I completely agree with that. Holy crap.
So, I thought I'll bring up something kind of that I noticed with the campaign. So, I would argue that General Duke almost was the Confederacy. That kind of the moment he switched sides, that the Confederacy was really done for. Like, what do you guys think of that theory?
I think it's obvious that the Confederacy was just a force and a story stepping stone to what was setting up what was to come. In one of the StarCraft novels that I just read called Uprising, it mentions how Minx wasn't the general yet, and he was basically performing an action that would probably give him that title. So going back to what Ian said, or it could have been you, Jack, one of you mentioned how we don't actually see the actual leaders of the Confederacy, and he wasn't even one of them, but he becomes one. So the Confederacy's really kind of shrouded in a bit of mystery.
Yeah. So I guess that's why I'm saying that, because it's when Mace is offering him a position as cabinet, it shows that Duke is really an important figure in the Confederacy, and Duke is kind of like, I'm a general, for God's sake, then they offer him, like, I'm going to let you be in my cabinet, and he just kind of says, okay, without a fight. It was kind of, I think General Duke was probably a little bitter maybe at the Confederates almost, because he has all this military power and everybody's above him, and he's kind of, offered a position to go above them. He's kind of like, well, I have all this power in my hand, why shouldn't I be able to do that?
Yeah, I can't remember where it was. It was in one of the little readings or something, but something I think Duke was a little bit resentful because he was stationed out where he was, which is maybe a little bit farther away from some of the action and the politics. So I think that that's a fair statement, that's kind of where it came out.
I think that is a good statement. I think it also plays into the idea that one thing the game made clear, and not even so much the game. Well, the game does make it clear, but the novels especially, is the Confederacy was very corrupt. They were hiding. They were doing really twisted experiments on people. They were allowing people to die. They were hiding everything under propaganda. It's almost like when it hits that boiling point, and then not to mention the Terran have been advertised as all coming. They all consider themselves descendants of criminals, right? So the Terran was at this boiling point, so it was just like basically ready for that moment to happen.
I was just thinking, we kind of have talked it around a little bit, but I do feel like you kind of join up with Manx really quickly in the game. And again, the game story kind of goes fast, right? There's only 10 levels, but it's like real quick. You're like, okay, he's going to help us out. Raynor's like on board. Raynor's the cool guy, so you're going to follow Raynor because you're like some magistrate or whatever, and you kind of become felons or convicts on the run once you join up with Manx. And then Manx starts doing shady stuff. And Kerrigan obviously has a bad feeling about it, and she's like his number one lieutenant. But at the same time, it's like, oh, we'll just keep doing everything that we do. And that kind of hit me as I was playing through it real quickly. I was like, man, you kind of just go along with Minsk, even when he starts doing dark stuff, like planting the psi emitter on Tarsonis, like real quick.
Good point.
Yeah, so I was going to bring up a little bit, because I think of the 4 characters, at least in, 5, you count the adjutant, but I don't think it really counts. She's kind of more like the narrator and the secretary of it. So, just thinking of General Duke, I'd say, he's the face of the Confederacy, so he's kind of the enemy on this. And the second he switches sides, is kind of Arcturus and Duke kind of merges with the enemy a little bit in the campaign and starts to, doing all those crazy stuff with psi emitters, like destroying Tarsonis with it. And I think Jim Raynor, I guess kind of the archetypes of them is they managed to put, the rebel, the enemy, the Confederacy, and then the common man kind of through Jim Raynor. Everybody just caught in this.
Yeah.
Doesn't really want a part of it. And then there's the soldier that just kind of follows orders, Kerrigan.
Yeah.
So she's, kind of the military aspect of everybody kind of just going along with it, even though they don't want to.
Yeah.
And Jim Raynor's just, everybody else caught crossfire.
Yeah.
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 I do think that's a good point, and I think it's important to point out the obvious that this campaign really sets up it's like the major moment that basically builds this entire franchise, and it's when Kerrigan gets taken by the Zerg. That they keep going back to that one point, and almost everything comes from that. And so that's a really important aspect to the story and what everything means and all that. The betrayal and Kerrigan and Minx, and it's a really good conclusion to the Terran campaign to set up what comes next.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really, you could say the game is almost about those 3 characters' dynamics: Jim Raynor, Arcturus, Mink, and Kerrigan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and that's, StarCraft 2 really expands on that, obviously, but I think you don't even know. At the end of the Terran campaign, you flee, you defeat the ion cannon, and you're able to leave with Raynor, but you don't really know what's next for the Terran. You don't know what's going to happen next. And the very next episode in the Zerg campaign, which we can get into later and stuff, sets that stage. You're like, oh, this is where we're going? Wild. Because you don't know what's going to happen next, and they don't give you a whole lot of information to go off of. You just know, like you were talking about Minsk's speech at the end, which at the end of that campaign, you're kind of like, yeah, let's go Terran, pro-Terran. But you also know that Minsk is kind of evil. So you could have mixed feelings about it, right? But it does really set everything up to see what is the next step in this game going to be. Then you beat that you beat the level, you get the cinematic, and then it goes to the campaign select screen. It's like, shoo, now go play the Zerg and see what happens next.
Yep. That's a really good way of putting it. I completely agree.
There was one thing I want to mention is it's kind of funny in the game that Jim Raynor and Kerrigan's relationship is completely developed off screen. Because the first thing you see is Kerrigan calling him pig. Then the next moment he's calling her darling, and she's like, obviously has something for him because she's like, your shining act, works sometimes, Jim. So it's kind of in between those moments, something happened. But it's off screen.
That's going to be an interesting topic to discuss, especially later, because I feel like the Kerrigan and Jim Raynor relationship has like 30% in game and 70% speculation outside on fandom. And if there's anything that we could probably take from this campaign with what you were saying that might even just purely be coincidental and not even by design, is the way that Kerrigan starts to warm up to him a bit. The significance is Kerrigan can read people's minds, and she knows how dark and twisted somebody is, and she probably knew that Jim Raynor deep down was a good guy.
Yeah, I mean, if women could read our minds, they would probably be saying the same thing to everybody. So,
but
Jim Raynor,
you're saying that if women can read everyone's minds,
yeah.
There'd be a lot of guys out there that they want to go near.
Right? Yeah.
Then maybe that's a whole different conversation we're not going to go into.
I don't know. I feel like my wife already read my mind.
I just say you can't blame Jim Raynor for that one moment of weakness,
No. That moment is just funny in its own right, because this is like, oh, you pig, and I'd be like, I'm over here just like, really, Kerrigan? You can't control your thoughts. I mean,
but also, I think also that's like a moment for all the girl gamers to be like, yeah, see?
Oh man, so yeah,
it's good.
That's very good. That's definitely going to be a big dynamic later, and we'll dive into that. So next time we're going to obviously discuss the Zerg campaign, which I'll just say right now, the Zerg have always been my favorite race in this game, so I'm looking forward to that. I have a lot of juicy things to discuss there. I have nothing else to say. Jackson and Ian, do you guys have anything else to add?
No, let's be looking forward to the Zerg campaign.
Yeah, I'm ready for the Zerg campaign.
Me too. I appreciate you guys coming on and discussing this. It's really fun to talk about something that, like, to normal people, this is just a game, but to us, this was literally our childhood. There's some real awesome, crazy nostalgia back there, and it's just great to go back to it and discuss it because it just kind of brings you back to that time, and looking forward to discussing it more.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And actually, this is one more thing I'll just add, because I love how much Starcraft 2 has, not Starcraft 2, Starcraft has aged, because you play Warcraft 2 and it is completely miserable to play. And despite all this stuff that we say about Starcraft, it is still a really good game.
That is true.
Yes, I will throw that out right now. If anybody happens to be hearing this and they've never played StarCraft and they've been thinking about playing StarCraft, you can't go wrong in trying it and experiencing it. Still holds up. Still, it's a product of its time. It'll take you back to an entirely different gaming era, and introduce you to a well thought out, awesome world that, for reasons, became very popular. So I recommend it. I recommend you play StarCraft and give it a shot if you never have. Otherwise, I appreciate you guys for coming on. I really do. And we will see y'all later.
All right. Thanks for having us.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yep. Thank you. Take it easy.